Your geography teacher lied to you. From how many continents exist to where countries actually are on the map, everything you learned was wrong. We're busting the biggest geography myths you were taught in school. Class is in session. And if you enjoy these videos, make sure to hit that subscribe button so I can finally tell my parents that writing about which way toilets flush in different hemispheres is a real career. Starting us off, number 25. England and Great Britain and the UK are the same thing. If there's one guaranteed way to annoy a Scottish person, it's saying they're from England. And before everyone from the UK jumps into the comments to say, of course we were taught the difference between England, Great Britain, and the UK, we know. But the rest of the world? Most people just throw those terms around interchangeably. And that's because, outside of Great Britain, wait, should that be the UK? Teachers never really bothered to break down the difference. England refers to the country of England, obviously. That's the one under Scotland and east of Wales. Though it is a country, it's not an independent, sovereign nation. That would be the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is made up of 4 constituent countries: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Though none are technically superior to the others within the UK, the political administration is mostly based in London. And England has by far the biggest population of the 4, 57.1 million people as of 2022, while Scotland has 5.4 million, Wales has 3.1 million, and Northern Ireland has 1.9 million. This means that, effectively, England wields a lot of power over the others. Scotland resents it, Northern Ireland is torn between Irish and British culture, and Wales is also there. Great Britain, on the other hand, refers to the 3 countries of the UK on the same landmass: England, Scotland, and Wales. Northern Ireland wasn't invited to the party. Meanwhile, the term British Isles covers all of the above, plus the Isle of Man, other small islands, and even the Republic of Ireland. Got that? Good, because it's hardly the only confusion about where places lie, geographically speaking. Number 24. Iceland is/isn't fully in Europe. This one is different because no matter which fact you learned, it's also a bit of a myth. Iceland literally straddles 2 continents. You can go to Thingvellir National Park and literally dive between the massive North American and Eurasian tectonic plates. Is there a more obvious between 2 continents status than that? And yet, Iceland is thought of as fully in Europe, and most geographers agree. Culturally and historically, Iceland is fully tied to Europe. Icelandic is related to Scandinavian languages. The country was settled in the 9th century by people from Scandinavia and the British Isles, and today it continues to be an active member of the European Economic Area. That doesn't change the fact that you can go diving in Iceland and see where North America and Europe separate on a planetary level. Speaking of weird continental separations, number 23, only Russia and Turkey span 2 continents. Russia and Turkey do span 2 continents, depending on what continents you learned about, as you'll soon see. But they're not the only countries that do so. Egypt spans Africa and Asia. Spain actually has some autonomous cities in North Africa. Indonesia spans Asia and Oceania, and because map makers can't agree where Europe ends and Asia begins, countries like Kazakhstan, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia often get stuck sitting on the border. Others argue that Panama is split onto 2 continents. The Panama Canal is technically the division between North and South America. This doesn't even touch on countries like France, which has whole islands and territories in North America, South America, and Oceania, like Guadeloupe, French Guiana, and French Polynesia. Fun fact, that's why France actually sits on the most time zones in the world, 12 total, not including Antarctica. But speaking of continents, there's a fair amount of myths about those too. Number 22, there aren't really 7 continents. Didn't expect that, huh? Well, there aren't 7 continents, at least not in any worldwide agreement, unlike every other global issue where countries always agree 100% of the time. In the US, most people learn that there are 7 continents in the world: North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, and Antarctica. You'll notice there's already a problem here. A bunch of island nations in the Pacific are kinda just left out doing their own thing. Some countries fix this by grouping them with Australia and New Zealand under the label Oceania. Others, especially in South America and Southern Europe, use a 6-continent model that merges North and South America into just America or the Americas. Then, some Eastern European countries separate the Americas but teach that Europe and Asia are Eurasia. And honestly, that makes more sense than lumping the Americas together, because Europe and Asia are literally part of the same continuous landmass. Just look at it. The only reason Europe and Asia were taught as separate continents in the first place is because the ancient Greeks were the ones who named them. Other places go with 5 continents, just like the Olympic rings: the Americas, Africa, Europe, Asia, and Oceania. Antarctica doesn't make the cut here, because apart from a few penguins and scientists in parkas, no one really lives there. And then there are teachers who hate their students and teach different models all at once, calling one system continents and others world parts. No matter what continents you learned, your view of them is probably off, because myth number 21, the shapes and mental maps of continents is weird. Obviously, the shapes of the continents taught in schools are usually way off, because most schools use the Mercator projection map instead of a globe. Have you ever tried sticking a globe up on a chalkboard? So, students get a very wrong idea of how big the continents and different countries are. On the Mercator map, Greenland looks like it's the same size as Africa. Most people realize that these sizes are wrong, but they don't realize how wrong. Africa is 14 times the size of Greenland. Because of the way continents are taught and talked about, people end up with bad visual maps in their brain. Most people think Europe is more or less directly across from the United States, but Europe is actually way further north. A capital city like Athens, Greece, the southernmost capital of mainland Europe, is somewhere between Denver and San Francisco in latitude. Also, because people, especially in the global north, think of South America as under North America, they sometimes forget that all of South America is east of Atlanta, Georgia. So, your idea of the continents is wrong. Your understanding of which countries are where is wrong, and you're probably wrong about what they're even named. Myth 20. The seasons are caused by the equator being closer to the sun than the North Pole. A study conducted by the Institute of Physics found that many students think the equator is closer to the sun than the North Pole, and that this causes the seasons. But the Earth is so far from the sun that the difference in distance between any 2 points on the planet is basically nothing. Earth's average distance to the sun is 90 million miles, 150 million kilometers. Even when the equator is closer, it's only about 6,200 miles, about 10,000 kilometers closer than the poles. Just 1/1500th of the distance. Absolutely nothing compared to the massive object that is our solar system. So what does cause the seasons? Students often get it wrong because, well, they're partly right. The Earth's tilt plays a role, but it's really the angle of the sun's rays hitting the Earth that drives the seasons, not the distance. When it's summer in the southern hemisphere in January, Earth is actually about 3 million miles, 5 million kilometers closer to the sun than it is in July, the northern hemisphere's summer. So no, Australians aren't secretly closer to the sun in January, they're just leaning the right way. Oh, speaking of the Earth's tilt though, myth 19, the Earth's axis and magnetic poles are fixed. Not to alarm you, but the planet you're currently standing on has been kinda wobbly lately. It's even making days longer. You know how you always wish there were more hours in a day? Well, you asked, and the universe delivered. It's actually due to glaciers melting. Now you can get a whole extra 1.33 milliseconds per 100 years. Who said climate change was a bad thing? 2 NASA studies showed that melting ice sheets and glaciers and the loss of more groundwater from aquifers has caused a redistribution of weight around the planet. Like most people getting up from their table after a Christmas dinner, this moving around of new weight causes the Earth to wobble. Called polar motion, this has changed the tilt of the Earth's axis by 30 feet, 10 meters since 1900. In addition, the planet's magnetic poles are also shifting around. This is due to a phenomenon called the dynamo effect. Honestly, a much cooler name than polar motion. Just like your college boyfriend or girlfriend, the poles have commitment issues and refuse to stay in one place. Earth's magnetic field is driven by the movement of molten iron and nickel deep in the outer core. Ever since British explorer James Clark Ross identified the North Magnetic Pole in 1831, scientists have tracked it drifting from the Canadian Arctic towards Siberia. Great, that's something else Putin will want. And where the North Magnetic Pole is matters. Even if you're not an explorer making your way around the frozen tundra by compass, scientists have to continuously reassess the positions of the poles to update the world magnetic model. Without that, systems like GPS would become useless. And we have it on good authority that none of us under 40 years old can get to work without them. Probably because we can't even point out major cities correctly, like number 18. Capitals. So many world capitals. To be fair, a lot of people get capitals wrong because they either A, weren't specifically taught them, or B, they forgot and now assume the biggest city is the capital, or C, went to school in America. Here are some of the cities most commonly confused for capitals. People think the well-known hub of Sydney with its famous opera house is the capital of Australia. It's Canberra. How about Brazil? Rio de Janeiro or Sao Paulo? No, that would be Brasilia. And the gorgeous 15.7 million resident strong Istanbul is mistaken as Turkey's capital, instead of the inland and less often visited or talked about Ankara. But some capitals were taught wrong as well. Many students learned that Cape Town is the capital of South Africa. Okay, it is a capital, but it's not the only one. It's the legislative capital. Pretoria is the administrative capital, and Bloemfontein is the judicial capital. This way, the branches of government are not only separate on paper, they're in different places altogether. Other countries have moved their capitals, but schools were slow to catch up. Nigeria shifted its capital from Lagos to Abuja in 1991, though textbooks kept teaching Lagos for years after. Kazakhstan moved its capital from Almaty to Akmala in 1997, then renamed it Astana just a year later. Tanzania started moving its capital from Dar es Salaam to Dodoma in 1974 and only officially completed the switch in 1996. Let's just say the wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly there. In fact, most people still call Dar es Salaam the capital, since half the government ministries never actually left. Some countries moved their capitals for truly wild reasons. Ivory Coast Prime Minister Felix Houphouët-Boigny moved the capital from the country's biggest city, Abidjan, to his hometown of Yamoussoukro in 1983, basically because he was born there. And in 2006, Myanmar shifted its capital from Yangon to Naypyidaw, before Naypyidaw was even finished. The new site is more centrally located, but some locals believe the real reason was that military rulers acted on an astrologer's warning about an impending foreign attack. That's a pretty major decision to blame on Mercury being in retrograde. But capitals aren't the only thing people mix up. Number 17. The South Pole and Antarctica are interchangeable. A lot of people use Antarctica and South Pole interchangeably when talking about the frozen ends of the Earth. But not only is the South Pole a specific geographic point within Antarctica, 90 degrees south, there are also 4 of them. And people don't 100% agree on what they are. The geographic South Pole is the one at 90 degrees south. Explorers Roald Amundsen and Robert Scott supposedly reached it in December 1911 and January 1912, though with the instruments of the time they were probably a little off. After all, it's nothing but snow in every direction. There wasn't exactly a "you are here" sign waiting for them. There's also the magnetic South Pole, which, as we've said, moves, and the geomagnetic South Pole, which is simply the opposite of the North Geomagnetic Pole. You'd think that would line up with the magnetic pole, but not quite. At the magnetic North Pole, for instance, your compass wouldn't point north at all. It would point straight down. The two magnetic poles aren't exactly opposite each other because Earth's magnetic field is, well, complicated. The fourth South Pole, depending on who you ask, is either the pole of inaccessibility, the point on Antarctica furthest away from any coastline and therefore hardest to get to, or the ceremonial South Pole. That's the one set up outside Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, the one you can take Instagram photos at. While it may have been the South Pole once, the Antarctic ice sheet keeps moving, so it's no longer there. Another weird fact about the South Pole, Antarctica. Number 16. The North Pole and Antarctica are equally harsh and cold. Yes, both are cold regions at the extremes of the Earth, but school teachers generally made the North Pole and Antarctica sound similar, besides the fact that one had polar bears and one had penguins. But Antarctica is actually much colder than the North Pole. After all, the North Pole is just a sheet of ice floating over the Arctic Ocean. By the way, your teacher probably taught you the wrong number of oceans, but we'll get there soon. Antarctica is a high-elevation landmass covered in ice, with 3 huge mountain ranges and surrounded by oceans and some of the fastest wind currents on Earth. The average elevation of the southern continent is 8,200 feet, about 2,500 meters. So how different are they? Well, the North Pole averages a balmy 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius in summer, and a chilly 40 below Fahrenheit, negative 40 Celsius in winter. And sure, it's not somewhere you'd like to set up a vacation home, but it's not unbearable. For comparison, the coldest inhabited place on Earth, Oymyakon, has an average January temperature of negative 50.3 degrees Fahrenheit, 45.7 below Celsius, making the North Pole seem pleasant by comparison. But Antarctica's average temperature in the summer is 18 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, negative 28 degrees Celsius, and in the winter, negative 76 degrees Fahrenheit, negative 60 Celsius. In that weather, water practically freezes in midair, and exposed skin lasts maybe 7 minutes before you turn into a human-shaped popsicle. And speaking of ice, number 15. Iceland was named Iceland because the Vikings wanted to confuse pirates. The name says it all, and yet the name is wrong. Even though Iceland is too far north to visit without a parka, the Atlantic country doesn't have that much ice on it. Only about 11% of Iceland is covered in glaciers. Thanks to the Gulf Stream, its climate is much milder than you'd expect. Compared to Greenland, where 80% is buried under the Greenland ice sheet, Iceland is positively green. So why was Iceland named that way, and can we complain to TripAdvisor? One popular myth teachers love to tell is that the Vikings named Greenland to lure in pirates, since they barely lived there and called Iceland ice to scare them away from the place they actually settled. But the Vikings didn't want to confuse anyone. They were just confused themselves and had some terrible luck. Norse explorer Hrafnafloki gave Iceland its name. He was one of the first men to step onto the new land, using 3 ravens to guide his journey. At the time, he didn't know his moves would be copied by Game of Thrones. Hrafnafloki set up camp in the West Fjords during a horrific winter. He was with his family and crew. Unfortunately, his livestock died, some of his crew, and even his own daughter. Desperate to improve their situation, Floki climbed the nearest mountain, only to see the next fjord was also filled with ice. Fed up, depressed, and exhausted, he and his remaining crew packed up their things and bailed. When he got back to Norway, he told everyone he could to stay away from that horrible Iceland place. Of course, he didn't know that he had experienced very rare and uniquely bad conditions in Iceland, but the name stuck. Floki wouldn't be the first person to get a completely inaccurate idea of a new land. Myth number 14, the Americas were sparsely populated before European colonization. The story usually goes that because people settled in the Americas much later than in Europe, around 13,000 years ago in the Americas versus about 54,000 years ago in Europe, the continent or continents ended up with far fewer people. But new evidence shows that the first modern humans probably got to North America 30 to 33,000 years ago by boat, and built up impressive empires, Incas, Aztecs, Olmecs, Nazca, Pueblo cultures, during their time there. It's hard to pin down exact populations centuries ago, something about sparse written records and a lot of record keepers being wiped out by smallpox, but American cities had been thriving for a long time. At its peak around 400 AD, Teotihuacan had between 125,000 and 200,000 people, and by 1500, Tenochtitlan had 200,000 to 250,000 residents, making it one of the largest cities in the world, just as big and possibly bigger than the largest cities in Europe at the time. When the Spanish arrived at the Incan capital, Cusco, it had 40,000 people in the city proper and 200,000 in the metro area. And the Andes probably made for much cooler suburbs than the ones you went to high school in. In 1500, the largest cities in Europe at this time were Paris with 225,000 residents, Naples with 125,000 residents, and Venice with 100,000 residents. Constantinople's population is basically a guess, between 200,000 and 600,000 people, because between Black Plagues and Ottoman occupations, things were shifting very rapidly. So why do many students learn that the Americas didn't have many people or big cities? Probably because it avoids some uncomfortable truths about how devastating European contact was. Diseases brought over from Europe wiped out as much as 90 to 95% of indigenous peoples. Within a short time, the Americas had far fewer people than the Europeans who arrived ever realized. Not that many students know which Europeans got to the Americas in the first place. Number 13. Columbus wasn't the first European to discover the Americas. First off, you can't discover a land tens of millions of people have lived on for generations. But more importantly, Columbus wasn't even close to the first European to set foot in the Americas. As many people found out after graduation, or because the coolest nerd in class corrected your teacher, the Vikings got to North America around 1000 AD. You can even visit the ruins of their first city, Lonzo Meadows. It shows evidence of having been fully built by 1021 AD, but you have to get up to Newfoundland, Canada to see it. Their American discovery went a little differently than Columbus. The Vikings were mostly looking for resources. They didn't care much about colonization or converting random people they met. And though Newfoundland does actually have gold and other minerals, we guess the Vikings didn't find it. Also, the East Canadian winters were brutal, even for Scandinavians, making farming difficult, and the natives didn't like them either. That's one similarity to Columbus's expedition. So, these first European settlers eventually decided there wasn't much for them in Canada, and they were better off trading and raiding around Greenland and Europe. Columbus arrived further south, to the dismay of everyone who lived there, in 1492 AD, at least 471 years later. To put it in perspective, 471 years ago, graphite pencils and bottled beer hadn't even been invented, or the very problematic Mercator map projection. But teachers say a lot of questionable things about Columbus. Myth number 12. People thought the Earth was flat before Columbus. If you just thought no one learned this in school, congratulations on not going to school in most of the US. In the book How Students Learn, Robert Bain asks 9th grade students about Columbus and what Europeans thought before his voyage. They said Europeans thought the world was flat and you could fall off it. Another student says, but Columbus proved them wrong. And apparently, they think the flat Earth theory went all the way back to earliest times. Everyone always thought the Earth was flat. Today, only about 2% of US adults still believe that, and they're the ones you avoid making eye contact with on the subway. But Columbus never proved the Earth was round, because everyone already knew it was. All the way back in 500 BC, in ancient Greece, thinkers from Pythagoras to Anaxagoras figured it was round. In the 3rd century BC, Aristotle established it as fact, and Eratosthenes of Cyrene even calculated the circumference with pretty impressive accuracy. Ferdinand and Isabella didn't want to fund Columbus's voyage at first because they were busy fighting wars, and also because their experts thought Columbus's plan was unrealistic, that he had really underestimated the distance to Asia. Spoiler, they were right. Coming across North America was a huge stroke of luck. Otherwise, Columbus would have drifted through a doubly wide Pacific Ocean and probably ran out of supplies. The reason this myth started, and is thankfully less frequently now taught, is because, among other reasons, an 1828 biography of Columbus by Washington Irving said so, and it appealed to a more sophisticated society that thought it was so much better and more progressive than those dumb medieval people, before they went back to balancing their humors with leeches. But to be clear, the Earth isn't perfectly round either. Myth number 11, the Earth is a sphere. Many students learn that the Earth is a sphere and assume it's a perfect billiard ball shape. But Earth is actually an oblate spheroid. In simple terms, because it rotates and has gravity, it bulges out just a little at the equator. Unlike Eratosthenes and other ancient thinkers, we can confirm this is true by just going up in space and looking. Granted, pictures from most satellites aren't detailed enough to show the planet's slight off shape. The diameter across the equator is only 0.3% bigger than the one between the poles. But scientists can measure highly detailed photos from the Himawari 8 satellite in pixels, and they saw the Earth was 10,906 pixels across and only 10,869 pixels from top to bottom. confirming the planet's slightly wonky shape. On the other hand, flat earthers looked at the photos, saw no huge visible difference, and cried fake, claiming scientists messed up by creating pictures of a perfectly round Earth. The planet was then disrupted by a bunch of ancient Greek philosophers spinning really quickly in their graves. So, students learned the Earth's shape wrong, don't know who discovered it first, and aren't even sure what was happening in the Americas before Columbus landed. But at least they know what's happening in the world of geography now, right? Right? No, because they're being taught things like myth number 10, that the Great Wall of China is visible from space. It is not, but a bunch of truly random, surprising things are. The division between Earth and space is called the Kármán line. It's 62 miles, 100 kilometers above the planet's surface. While this may not sound like that much, when you're flying in a plane, you're only 5 to 7 miles, 8 to 11 kilometers above the planet's surface. So what can astronauts see from there? Incredible feats of human engineering, like the Bingham Canyon mine. Located 20 miles, 32 kilometers southeast of Salt Lake City, it's the largest man-made excavation in the world and deepest open-pit mine. NASA confirms that you can also see the Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze River from space. But the Great Wall, astronaut Chris Hadfield confirms it's just not visible. He tweeted, quote, "It's too narrow, plus follows the natural contours and colors of the area," which just sounds like a massive diss to the Qin, Han, and Ming dynasties that built it. NASA astronaut and ISS commander Leroy Chiao did take a photo of the wall, but he then explained he couldn't actually see it when taking the photo. That makes sense, as the International Space Station orbits 250 miles, 400 kilometers above the planet's surface. However, Chiao said he can see cities from space. Fellow astronaut Clayton Anderson agrees, stating, "One of my favorite cities, Omaha, Nebraska, first appeared to me as a big gray blob." If you live in Omaha, let us know if it looks any different up close. But speaking of man-made wonders, the Great Wall, not Omaha, many students believe myth number 9, the Egyptian pyramids are the largest in the world. Archaeologists also thought this for a long time, but recent discoveries have located an even bigger pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Cholula in Mexico, otherwise known as, give me a second, Tlachihualtepetl, is massive. It has a volume of 116.5 million cubic feet, 3.3 million cubic meters. The Great Pyramid of Giza, only 92 million cubic feet, 2.6 million cubic meters. Not so great after all. The pyramid in Giza is still taller, though. 454 feet, 138.5 meters, compared to Cholula, just 217 feet, 66 meters. But Cholula's base is what makes it so big. Why didn't archaeologists know this before? Even though the Great Pyramid of Cholula is just 62 miles, 100 kilometers outside of Mexico City, no one had realized just how big it was until excavations began in 1931. The pyramid had been abandoned by the 7th or 8th century AD. By the time the Spanish arrived, it had almost completely been covered by earth, looking like a hill more than anything else. To this day, less than 4% of the pyramid has been excavated. The pyramids of Giza are more famous, partly because they've been visible and known for much longer, and in an easily accessible place on the outskirts of one of Africa's largest cities, Cairo. That's why another myth about them persists. Myth number 8, Egypt has the most pyramids in the world. Sudan, just to the south of Egypt, has over 200 to 250 Nubian pyramids, which makes Egypt's 138 seem less impressive. But tourism to the much poorer and more frequently war-torn country of Sudan isn't as easy, meaning not many people know about the pyramids found there. Most of the Sudanese pyramids are clustered around the city of Meroe. It was the capital city of the Kingdom of Kush, which grew and thrived from 780 BC to 330 AD. The Kushites were so powerful that they actually conquered Egypt sometime between 750 and 747 BC, ruling for almost a century. Until the Assyrian invasion in 656 BC forced them out, in the ancient world's ongoing, violent game of musical chairs. Although inspired by them, the Sudanese pyramids have different decorations than the Egyptian pyramids, as well as smaller bases and steeper sides. Unfortunately, foreign tourists can't really access Sudan these days due to the ongoing war there. But hopefully one day, the country will experience peace and people from all over the world will be able to see these ancient wonders. However, this part of the world has a lot of other misconceptions about it. Myth number 7. The Sahara is the biggest, driest desert in the world. Not one of these descriptions is true. Desert refers to a really dry area. It doesn't have to be somewhere hot and sandy. So the biggest desert in the world is actually Antarctica, measuring 5.5 million square miles, 14.2 million square kilometers. Big. 1.5 times the size of China. Well, the Sahara has to be the second biggest, right? Nope. That would be the Arctic Polar Desert, which is 5.3 to 5.4 million square miles, 13.7 to 13.9 million square kilometers. It covers northern parts of North America, Europe, and Asia. But the Sahara is the third biggest desert. And the driest? No, because Antarctica is also the driest place on Earth. This polar desert gets only about 2 inches 5 centimeters of precipitation a year. But conditions are so bad for human life there that too little rain isn't at the top of anyone's list of issues in the area. Okay, but is the Sahara the driest for hot deserts? Nope, that would be the Atacama Desert in Chile. It receives less than 0.04 inches, 1 millimeter of rain in some areas, which is basically just bird spit, and no rainfall at all for hundreds of years in others. So why is the Sahara so famous if it's not the biggest or the driest? Well, it is the biggest hot desert on Earth, but also the Sahara played a huge part in Eurasian and African history. It affected weather patterns, cutting off civilizations from each other, determining trade routes or the lack of them, and creating a huge challenge for civilizations and people for millennia. The obstacle of the Sahara was so huge, it couldn't be overcome as easily as other trade challenges, like finding a way to cross the super narrow country of Panama. Oh, speaking of which, number 6, you cross the Panama Canal from east to west. Rather, to get from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, you head southeast. This probably makes no sense in your mental map of Central America, but let's look at it closely. While the Atlantic is east of Central America for most of it, things get weird once you reach Panama. The country runs more east-west than its neighbors, and right where the canal cuts through, it even curves slightly north. That means that to get through the 51-mile, 82-kilometer canal, ships enter near Limon Bay in the Atlantic. From there, they head southeast through the Gatun Locks and Lake. Next comes the Culebra Cut that slices through the mountains. And then they pass through Miraflores Lake and locks to get out onto the Pacific. Obviously, ships heading from the Pacific to the Atlantic head northwest, the opposite way. The reason ships have to travel southeast rather than south is because a canal straight through this part of Panama would have taken longer to dig due to longer distance and slightly harder geography. They can go on down to the southern hemisphere and check what they learned about toilets flushing differently there. Oh wait. Myth number 5. A toilet flushes the opposite way in the southern hemisphere. You probably learned this in school, if not from your teacher, from your friend who relied way too much on poop jokes. But it's not true, so how did it become a thing in the first place? It's because of something called the Coriolis effect. That's when objects moving across Earth's rotating surface appear to curve, to the right in the northern hemisphere and to the left in the southern hemisphere. The effect is supposed to apply to both air and water. For example, it happens with hurricanes. They rotate counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern hemisphere. People often don't observe this because they're too busy driving away panic-stricken to higher ground or telling their neighbors, "It's my home and no hurricane is gonna chase me out," before they're never seen again. So people thought, logically, if the Coriolis effect works on something as huge as hurricanes, it probably works on something as tiny as flushing toilet water as well. But turns out the size of it might be the problem. The Coriolis effect is relatively small, so while it works on something huge, it doesn't do much to practically affect water going down your sink or toilet. Not to mention, water in a toilet is usually injected at an angle with enough force that the Coriolis effect isn't nearly enough to cancel it out. Funnily enough, that's not the only geography myth schools taught about water. Number 4, rising water levels are caused by melting sea ice. This is partly true, but most teachers stop the lesson there. If yours didn't, congratulations, you went to a good school. Melting ice causes water to rush into the sea, eventually increasing water levels. But the thing that causes melting sea ice, warmer temperatures, also causes the water to expand all on its own. It's called thermal expansion. When most substances are heated up, their atoms and molecules vibrate more intensely, increasing the distance between them. The substance then has to expand. And according to the Paleological Research Institute, melting ice caps and glaciers are responsible for just over half of global sea level rise. The rest comes from thermal expansion, water taking up more space as it warms. In other words, the damage is almost a perfect 50-50 split. If you haven't noticed, water is kind of weird for a substance. We give it a pass because we need it to live, but it's strange. It expands when it heats, but it also expands when it cools. That's why when ice melts in your glass, your drink never overflows. So now you might be wondering, what about the other part of this equation? Why does melting ice raise sea levels at all if water is bigger in ice than liquid form? It's because the melting ice is unfortunately mostly on land to begin with. So when it falls into the sea, it adds on water that was never there. So much that the NOAA's 2022 Sea Level Rise Technical Report thinks sea levels could rise by up to 1.6 feet, half a meter, by 2050. We'll give you a second to Google your hometown's elevation while we move on to another weird myth about the planet's oceans. Myth number 3, there are 4 oceans. This is one of those facts that was probably true when you learned it, but not anymore. Most children in the 1900s and early 2000s learned that the world has 4 oceans: the Atlantic, Pacific, Arctic, and Indian Oceans. But in 1999, the US Board on Geographic Names approved the name Southern Ocean for the oceans surrounding Antarctica. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, recognized it as well. Unfortunately, most of the rest of the world was too busy partying it up before Y2K to notice. While scientists had been arguing that the Southern Ocean is different for years, it didn't really become a publicly discussed idea until June of 2021. To be fair to humanity, 2000 to 2021 was a lot. We were looking for jobs in a crisis while waiting for the next terrorist attack and celebrating the first pandemic in over 100 years. No one was paying attention to the water around Antarctica. But in 2021, on World Oceans Day, of course, National Geographic announced that it would recognize the Southern Ocean. Part of the reason for the distinction is that the Southern Ocean is actually different. Unlike the water to the north, it is colder and less salty. And thanks to the Antarctic circumpolar current, it carries more water around Antarctica than any other ocean current on Earth. Scientists also wanted to draw attention to the conservation efforts needed in these very important and very vulnerable waters, as climate change hits the poles hardest. It's not the only fact that's less myth and more changed over time. Like myth number 2. China has the biggest population in the world. To be fair to your school teachers, this was probably true when they were teaching it to you, unless you're currently in school and still learning the same thing, in which case, tell your teachers they're wrong. India officially surpassed China as the world's most populous country in April of 2023, ending the title China had held since the 1950s. Today, India has about 1.419 billion people, compared to China's measly 1.407 billion, a number that's now on the decline. A large part of this change has to do with different birth rates. India has an average birth rate of 1.98 births per woman, almost a perfect replacement rate, as 2 births per woman would mean the next generation is exactly as big as the previous one. China's birth rate? 1. That's it. In the 1960s, both countries had birth rates of about 6 children per woman. In India, that number gradually declined over time, as usually happens with economic development and progress for women. In China, though, it spiked briefly before plunging just as dramatically. The fall had to do with China's one-child policy, which only allowed couples in China to have 1 kid. Since rights and privileges were more heavily tilted towards men, this also caused Chinese couples to favor male children over female children. This has caused a further problem with population growth in the country, as China's population has 104 men for every 100 women. So there's even fewer women around now to give birth to the next generation. And finally, myth number 1. Teaching the exact coastline length of anywhere. Myth, inaccuracy, whatever you want to call it, the Coastline Paradox makes sharing the exact length of a place's coastline practically impossible. And here's where we admit our own hypocrisy. We've definitely used coastline measurements in MapPack, saying the coastline of X country is way easier than the most current accurate assessment of X's coastline is blank. Back in 1961, English mathematician Lewis Fry Richardson noticed different countries were measuring the exact same coastline and coming up with completely different lengths. More and more people studied this and realized why. Coastlines are full of tiny nooks and crannies, and their shapes are always changing. So the length of a coastline depends on how closely you measure it. And the closer you look, the longer it gets. That's the paradox. As Dutch geographer Catherine Samler says, you could technically measure a coastline down to the grain of sand or atomic level or smaller, which would mean a coastline's length could be close to infinity. Then again, saying every coastline is infinity miles long seems like a cop-out, so we'll keep giving it our best shot. We hope you enjoyed these geography myths, and we didn't even touch the myths about countries. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MapPack.